Welcome to our home. Lovely to have you with us. And yes, we have our coffee. Hope you've got yours, and we trust that our brief time together will benefit you.
Yeah, a couple of days ago, we got a call from Andre, and he asked if we would just share what's happened in our lives in the last 3-4 weeks. And thank you, Andre, for the opportunity. We're grateful. We trust that this short period of time that we have with you will be so beneficial that you'll be able to glean some stuff, learn some stuff maybe through our own experiences, and that ultimately that God would be glorified.
Okay.
Over to you.
Okay, today I'd like to talk about the two much-loved daughters. We obviously have two of our own daughter-in-laws, but I'd like to talk about one of them and a daughter belonging to someone else. And the other daughter would be Des and Karen's daughter Chandra and our daughter-in-law Paige. And about a month ago, we got a FaceTime call from Brad and Paige, and obviously we were sitting down, and obviously we knew there was some news coming. Very excited to find out that they were going to have a baby. And great excitement, and as grandparents normally would do, we began to pray for the development of the baby. And a couple of weeks later, Chandra went for a simple hearing test and discovered that, the doctor said to her parents that she needed to possibly go for an MRI scan. And so she went for the scan, and which is unusual if you're just going for a hearing test.
Yeah.
Went for the scan and discovered that she had a 7-centimeter tumor on her brain, which they suggested needed to be removed immediately. And so that was a bit of hectic news for them. And we started to stand in prayer along with a couple of friends for them, obviously praying for Chandra. And then a day before Chandra's surgery, we got a message to pray for Paige. There was just some stuff that they were a little concerned about, and they went in. It was close to midnight for them, I think.
Yeah,
it was an afternoon for us.
Yeah.
And later that day, they confirmed that there was no heartbeat, and in their words, our baby's in heaven. And it was such pain for them and such devastation. And obviously we felt for them, we felt helpless being here. They were in the US, and ordinarily for us to, as parents, just jump in our car and be there for our children is a very natural thing to do, as I suppose most parents do. Anyway, the next day, on the 6th of May, Chandra went in for the surgery, and it happened to be a more complicated surgery than what they suspected. She ended up being in ICU, but she pulled through. It was fine. And on the Thursday, the 7th, in the late afternoon, we got quite a frantic call from Des and Karen to say, please pray. Shani wasn't responding, and they needed to go to the hospital. And of course, we found ourselves praying, just rallying around them, getting friends together, rallying around them. And Chandra that evening was placed on life support. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
So Des and Karen found themselves
in
this crazy storm, and maybe the next morning.
Yeah, the next morning, Andre, Ian and I were standing in the Peg-Leray hospital and just waiting for them to come out. Shani was on life support, and they had to make a decision to turn the machines off. And with COVID-19, obviously we weren't allowed to go into the hospital. So we were standing outside, and shortly after that, a very distraught, as you can all imagine, Des came out of the hospital and said that the machines had been turned off and Shani had passed on to be with the Lord. And it was so awful, and as Ian said, Des and Karen found themselves in this incredible storm that was raging obviously from all sides, and we were able to be there for them, which we were ever so grateful that we were. And others probably would have wanted to be there too, but obviously, people have commitments, and
it was a working day, it was a Friday.
And so we were blessed to just be there.
Yeah. So, but hey, let's just pray and commit this time to the Lord. Father, we thank you that we can come before you in the precious name of Jesus. And Father, as we've tried to be faithful in preparing this material for this chat, we ask, Lord, that you would help us. Lord, may it not be perceived as us being prideful as we explain the journey, but Lord, that it's just our desire to be helpful to the folk that hear. And so I also want to pray, Lord, that in this time, that you would speak a specific word through us to each person listening, that there will be something in what we say that just triggers a specific word in each person's heart, I pray, in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. I'd like to encourage you.
Sorry, please can I just say before he carries on, I need to apologize for my eye. I sneezed prior to the recording, and this is what happens when you have a real sneeze. Okay.
Yeah, shame. Her one eye's a bit bloodshot. I didn't need to. I promise. It's a sneeze. So, I just want to encourage you just to have a posture of leaning in and saying, what is it that I can learn? I think that during this chat, that God can really do what only He can do. And speak a specific word to you. So I'm trusting for that. Okay, a question I'd like to ask is, who's been through a massive storm in your life? I think we're all going to say we all have. We've all been through a crazy storm. Well, who's in one at present? Maybe you're currently in a crazy one at present. But I'm going to ask Doreen just to share a storm that we went through in 2008.
Now, obviously, 2008 brought recession. And I think the property market and the motor industry were the hardest hit, but I suppose every business was. But our monthly turnover became our yearly turnover, and that was a huge knock. We found ourselves in a very, very dark time with obviously also raging storms around, and we desperately needed God to intervene. And every credit card, every home loan, everything that could be maxed out for us was maxed out. And our overdraft was 5 million that we...
Total
debt, was 5 million that we had to service with very little income. And Ian felt very paralyzed by the storm. Actually was diagnosed with depression. And if I can tell you anything about Ian, if you told him anyone was depressed, he said there's no such thing as depression, didn't believe in it, it wasn't a sickness, you just pull yourself together and you move on. And he was diagnosed with depression, and a very, very, very eye-opening time for him.
Yeah.
And so we had a few stretcher bearers that carried us in that season. We had Des and Karen that walked with us daily, praying in the Safari Gardens neighborhood, just so faithful in walking with us, praying with us, coming home, having toast and coffee, and just being with us. We had Albie that would constantly be calling, and Lorraine for that matter, that would constantly, every day in fact, be calling Ian. We had a couple from Hutties that we'd met in overseas that people were just rallying around us, and
people.
Fitz and Jane, and
just a bunch.
just many people
Too
that
many
walked
to
with us.
too many to mention.
Too many to mention. But just so many people trusting for breakthrough. And
So if we're honest with ourselves, we've all been through a storm, and some of you are in a storm right now. These storms differ. But
be very slow and gradual.
Some can be gradual and relentless. Some can be vicious and some can be vicious and relentless, whatever. But just a couple of storms, or what happens in a storm is that you really get to sometimes feel that you are in over your head and that there's nothing that you can do. Some of you may have experienced a loss of a loved one like Des and Karen. Some of you may have gone through a medical storm, currently in a medical storm of some sort. Some of you may have gone through a financial hurricane like we did, and some of you are experiencing unrelenting pressure at work, even with this COVID-19 situation. There are stresses and pressures that come with this, and so some of you may have lost a job at this time. Some of you may be falsely accused of something and went through that, and that was a crazy storm. Some of you may have experienced betrayal, and that was heartbreaking. Some of you may have a situation with a child where the relationship's not what it's supposed to be, and you're in the middle of a storm. Others, maybe your marriage is a bit of a storm, and you know that it's definitely not ideal. So as we chat, I want you to think about your storm. Think about the people that you have around you. Do you have stretcher bearers? Do you have people that could possibly help you in this season? I'm going to ask Doreen to read a passage quick.
Okay, in Mark 12 verse 28, it says, "And one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together, perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, What is the first commandment of all? Jesus answered him, The first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second like it is this, You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than this."
Okay, so two truths here. You must love the Lord your God, and you must love your neighbors. And I get the love your Lord your God. That's natural. I mean, of course we need to. But let me just ask you a little bit. Let me just push into this little point first. It's not my main point, but it's just a little point. Let's push in here and say, is he still your first love? Do you still pursue him? Do you desire to have a deeper relationship with him? Are you on a journey with him? Or is your pursuit maybe your career? Or could it be that your pursuit is fame and fortune? Could it be that you've lost your first love? I need to ask, is he truly your beloved? Is he your beminde? I'm reminded of Ryan and Bethany. They dated long distance.
It's our son.
It's our son, yeah, eldest son. They dated long distance. Ryan was in South Africa, Bethany was in the USA. And Ryan pursued Bethany, and eventually they got married. And the last line in his marriage vows I thought was just genius. He had pursued her, and he had finally got her. And his last line, I'd like to read to you, of his marriage vows. He says, "And for the rest of my days will I never stop pursuing you." He says, for the rest of the days, I will never stop pursuing you. And I thought, Lord, may it be said of us. May we, for the rest of our days, continuously pursue you. May he be your beminde. But hey, let me move on to the next part of the passage. And Jesus says that we need to love our neighbors as ourselves. And why such a huge focus on loving our neighbors as ourselves? I'm going to try and unpack some of that now with you guys. But before we can say why love our neighbors as ourselves, let's just think a little bit about love. And I've got a few thoughts here. The first thing is, love is never a chore. It's not a duty. It's not a task. It's never hard. It should be easy, you know. When your son calls you in the middle of the night and you're asleep, that's not a hard call to take. You willfully take the call and deal with the situation, offer the advice they're looking for. That's an easy call to take. Why? It's the middle of the night, a little inconvenient maybe, but the point is, it's your son. You love them dearly, and so you take the call. So we are required to be there for others, and we're required to love them in a way that doesn't consider the cost. I like what Galatians 6:2 says. It says, "Dra mekaar se laste en vervul so die wet van Christus." We need to carry one another's burdens, and in the way that we carry one another's burdens, we fulfill the law. So how do we carry one another's burdens? How do we become the stretcher bearers that God requires us to be? In the First World War rather, they had people called stretcher bearers, and these are people that would put the wounded onto a stretcher and carry them back for assistance. They would take them from the front line and carry them back to for assistance. Sometimes there were 2 stretcher bearers that would, one in front, one in the back. Sometimes with the mud, it was necessary to have 4 stretcher bearers on a stretcher. But the point is, there were people that needed help. And these stretcher bearers, their sole purpose was to carry these people from the front line to the back for help. There were like 16 in every battalion. And so it was a strategy, it was a plan. It was like this. They knew there would be people that are injured, and they knew there would be people in storms that needed help. And so we have this concept of stretcher bearers that I want to speak about. I want to have Doreen process or read rather a scripture for us that references 5 people. 4 of them I think were farmers, and I'll give you an indication a little bit later why I think they're farmers, but maybe you can read that passage for us.
It's Mark 2 verse 1 to 5. It says, "And again he entered Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Immediately many gathered together, so that there was no longer room to receive them, not even near the door, and he preached the word to them. Then they came to him, bringing a paralytic who was carried by 4 men, and when they could not come near him because of the crowd, they uncovered the roof where he was. So when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was lying. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, 'Son, your sins are forgiven you.'"
Okay, so we see in the story, we see 4 people that carried, 4 stretcher bearers that carried a paralyzed man. So I want to look at what can we glean from the attitude and of these 4 people. What can we learn and what can we see? The first thing I'd like to say about the situation is that the man was paralyzed. He couldn't help himself. He needed people around him to help him. And sometimes our storms are unrelenting and they sap all the energy out of us, and we find ourselves in a hole or in a bad place. The point is, though, that in those times you need help. You need to be able to reach out to people. You need to have people in your life that will help you, that will carry you, that will just be with you in the situation. Yesterday I had a discussion with Des as they've come through Chandra's passing, and he was sharing with me and said that he was in the shower and felt totally overwhelmed. The storm was raging, and he ended up sitting in the shower. He said he's never sat in the shower in his life before, but he ended up sitting in the shower, just desperate, crying out to God. And this happens. This kind of thing happens in the midst of a crazy storm. He said to me that he found himself crying out to God, and he said, "I'm grateful that you gave her to me, but I'm not grateful that she's gone." You see, the storm is real. The storm is real. They're in the middle of a real storm. "I'm grateful that you gave her to me, but I'm not grateful that she's gone," he said. You know what? That line, when he said it to me, I said, "Hold on, I need to get a piece of paper." And I quickly wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. Because it describes the storm, it describes the pain. So firstly, the first observation I want to make about these 5 guys is that the one person was paralyzed. Second observation I'd like to make is that the 4 were present. They were there. They weren't at the market. They weren't farming, doing something else. They were present, and they were in a place that they could take this man. When Des came out, there's value in being present. This is the point I want to make about us being present. When Des came out of the hospital, and we just held him, Andre and us, we were there, we just prayed and held. And you don't really know what to say. It's difficult. What can you say? Nothing you say will bring Chandra back. It's just what it is. And so heart-wrenching. And as we were eventually walking towards the car, I said, "Des, what are you going to do now?" He said, "I'm going to go to Avpop." I said to him, "Can I go?" And he said, "Yes." And he gave me the forms that he'd received from the hospital, and so off I went to AFBOP. Now, the point I'm making is that I was present. Had I not been present, I wouldn't have known about the need, and we would never have gone to AFBOP. And as it worked out, Des never had to go to AFBOP. Another occasion, later in the same day, Pastor Rion Fourie from the Presbyterian Church called Des, and Des saw it was him, and he was overwhelmed at the time. He couldn't take the call. I was present. I was able to take the phone and take the call. And in that moment, Rion turned around and said, I know that Kruislig doesn't have a venue. He said, would you like to use my building? I said, hey, I'll process that with Des. And you know what? In a very short period of time, the whole service was arranged. There were stretcher bearers that came around, ladies that sorted food, Lorraine, Mariette, all sorts of people. I don't even know everybody who was on the food roster. I don't know everybody who made food for the church.
People just rallied around.
But there were stretcher bearers that came that had the presence of mind to step in and make, just to carry the load, you know. So it was beautiful. Something else that happened was shortly after the memorial service, there were so many people that watched the memorial on Facebook. And 3 people from overseas contacted us and said, how can we help? What can we do? I know we're far, but what can we do? And something that had happened is Des and Karen thought that Chandra was on their funeral policy, but she had got too old, and so she had, if you like, fallen off the policy. And that was there was a need there. Sure, Des could have paid it out of his cash flow, I'm sure, but they didn't know that they had no cover. And so I mentioned this to these people, and you know that these stretcher bearers overseas just started to work out, how can we get money to you for what's needed? And you know that the entire cost of AFBOP was dealt with. In fact, there was 500 rand spare, which was lovely. But the point is, though, that people overseas, even a local person as well, contributed financially, and the entire cost was dealt with.
People contributed in every way.
Everywhere.
From pamphlets to food to flowers to food to everything.
A bunch of stretcher bearers. There wasn't an awful lot that Des and Karen needed to think about. I think one of the few things they processed was the list of people that could come to the funeral, because it was a COVID funeral, only 50 people. So that was something they did. And I mean, Kirsty rather did the pamphlet with Marie, the pamphlets, the brochures for the church, and Aidan worked on a lovely slide presentation. So there were a few things they did, but the point is there were people that rallied, and there were stretcher bearers that were there. Another thing that I want to say about stretcher bearers, and even about these 4 people, is that it took time from them. They needed to sacrifice a day. They needed to decide to step in. And I wrote a line down here, and I'm going to read it to you because I don't think I can say it better. I wrote, don't let community life or loving others be sacrificed on the altar of busyness. We have to find the time and not be too busy
we often use that as an excuse.
Or too selfish to not step in. So that's the point. Another point that I wanted to make is that they made themselves available. They got involved to help carry the load, and they were available. They were present. They were available. You know what? Des knew that he could call. We need to be available. And the person who needs help needs to know that they've got stretcher bearers around them that can help and be available. Something else that these guys did is that they didn't stop at obstacle. There were learned people there. There were scribes and Pharisees there. You know, call it the guys with the PhDs of the day. They were there, and all they've got is they've got some sick guy that needs to get to Jesus, and they're not intimidated by the presence of who is there. Sometimes people can offer resistance, and we mustn't be intimidated by the resistance that comes. Sometimes you may be helping somebody, and someone will comment and say, why do you bother? You're busy with a helpless case here. Why are you involved? So So we need to be sure that we're not going to allow those voices to bring resistance and stop us in our process. Don't take the bait. Sometimes the person needing help can be the one offering the resistance. I need to tell you that in the middle of 2008, Dion Hanekom, a man that we met in Amsterdam and Holland when we were on a Trafalgar tour of Europe, he called me in the midst of the 2008 struggle that we had, and he asked for my banking details. And I said to him, no, Dion, thank you, but you don't need my banking details. I'm not going to give them to you. And I put down the phone. I suppose maybe I was embarrassed, maybe it was pride, maybe a bit of both, but I didn't give him his banking details. But you know what? He pushed through despite the resistance, and he had Laurette call Doreen. And Doreen came to me and said, Laurette's just called me and they want our banking details. Well, by then I thought that maybe I was a little stupid, and so a big trots. And so what I did was I gave the banking detail. We gave the banking details. The next morning I woke up and 25,000 Rand had been deposited into our account. If I must tell you the amount of times that we were given money in that season, it was insane. But you know what? God was faithful, and we came through that storm. But the point that I'm wanting to make is, don't allow resistance that you experience prevent you from helping others. And now I want to get to the last point about the fact that why I think these guys were farmer guys. Let me tell you what. In Afrikaans we've got this saying, 'n boer maak 'n plan. And I tell you, when they got to the gate, to the door rather, it was blocked, to maak hulle 'n plan, to gaan hulle dak toe. And so that's why I'm saying they were farmers. They went in, they made a plan, despite the resistance, despite the people, despite the issues that it had, they decided, we are going in. They could have said, you know what, we'll just lay the man here by the front door. Eventually Jesus is going to leave the house. When he leaves the house, he'll see, our friend. But no, they decided to make a plan. They pushed in, it took energy, it took effort, and they accomplished their goal. They got the paralyzed man to Jesus. And something about stretcher bearers and the fact that, you know what, we desperately need these people. I'll never forget, shortly after I joined the church, Rian Berta was talking about an incident that he had on the road. I think it was a puncture, and his spare wheel was also flat. And he was thinking, who should I call? Who should I call? You know what, it's not right that when you have a need, you should be thinking, who should I call? You should have stretcher bearers on your phone under speed dial that can call you the minute, that you can call rather, the minute there's an issue. It doesn't help you have one or two. What if the one is underground, and what if the second one's out of town? You need multiple stretcher bearers that you can call on when you have a concern. You know what? They will gladly help. That's what we're called to do. We are called to help one another. They'll help. So we really do need stretcher bearers. When I was talking to Des yesterday, actually, he told me how he really appreciated the fact that post everything that's happened, that I call him daily. And he says he really looks forward to the calls. Now let me say something about those calls. They're not easy. How do you start a phone call? How are you? Well, I know he's not fine. I know the answer to that. But do I really want to call? What's the deal? So you end up asking, how did you sleep last night? Did you sleep through? How was it last night when it got dark and when you were alone with your thoughts? And how was it this morning when you woke up, and how you been feeling? And he just shares and unloads all these thoughts and emotions with me. And hey, Des is quite a proud man. I think we all are. But you know what? We're seeing a man who's just unloading and broken and prepared to share his intimate thoughts and hurts. And he turned around to me yesterday and he said, you know what, Ian, I really look forward to these phone calls. In fact, I know that I've learned the value of these phone calls, and when I see others in storms in future, I know what role I need to play. I need to get on the phone and call. Now you see, in 2008, I had Albie call me daily. And he would ask me, how did it go with that client? what's happening with this? He seemed to remember everything that was going on in my business. And he would ask me, what about this? Did you follow up with that one? What does this one say? He knew so much. He was calling me daily. And it was because it was modeled to me that I found it quite easy now to do it for Des. But I asked Albie in the week, I said to him, Albs, why did you call me daddy? And he said to me that when his son, Aiden, had the drowning accident, and some of you may not know, but Aiden was in a bad way and needed lots of medical help for a year and a half, and ultimately he passed away. But he told me, Albie told me, in that time he had a person by the name of Sean Truter who called him daily. You see, Albie experienced a stretcher bearer, and he became one for me. And now I experienced it, and I can be one for Des. But hey, by the way, Albie's also a stretcher bearer in the story for Des as well. So we know that as this has been modeled for us, as you see people doing things, it's quite simple. It's an easy process. It's monkey see, monkey do. So just learn and glean from other stretcher bearers in your life. Finally, I want to close with a few thoughts. The first thing, there's a scripture I'd like to read. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. By this will all men know that you are my disciples, if you have loved one for another. So Jesus places a high emphasis on loving one another in the previous passage that we read. But by this will all men know that you are my disciples. Do you know what? There is a world outside that watches us closely. There is a world outside that watches to see, are we truly who we claim we are? Are we truly the stretcher bearers that we need to be? And so that's a huge reason why we need to be stretcher bearers. Not only because we love the person, but because the people are watching us. What we do, in essence, is also an evangelistic tool for those that do not have the knowledge of Christ, to observe, to see, to watch, and to be drawn closer to the Lord as a result of our actions. So I want to really encourage you and say, be the stretcher bearer that God has called you to be. Find those people who need help. If you're in help, if you need the help, well, you know what? You need to speak up. And if you have no one around you, well, that's on you. You know, you really need to be in community. You need to be in a connect group. You need to be involved and plugged into the church. It's vital. It's vital. You need to be vulnerable. You need to be prepared to share your hurts and share your things. So, yeah. So thanks. I don't know if you want to just close it out.
Just been lovely to have you with us, and we trust that as we strive to be the feet and hands of Jesus, that we can set the example and just love our neighbours more. And so it's been good to be with you. We love you all.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time, and be the stretcher bearer that God has called you to be. Love you.
Bye.
Bye.